these are my grandmother's tamales. The correct way to make tamales is however your grandmother did it.
True.
Because somebody will look at my tamales and say, that is so wrong. And they're right. Because I never knew, these are the only kind of tamales I knew growing up. I never knew that there were so many varieties in Mexico. I never knew that you could make tamales out of shrimp or iguana. Some tamales use a combination of chiles. Some use, these tamales are basically what you'd call tamales norteños, northern Mexican tamales. Because we live in Texas, it's logical that that would have had a big influence in the way we make the tamales here. So, these northern tamales generally are only made with the chile ancho. That's the only chili you use, with the exception of some chile powder that my grandma used, and we'll talk about that later. But anyway, so the first thing you want, so if somebody criticizes your tamales as not being correct, they're right, because it's not the way their grandma made it. We pureed it. Okay, now on the, there we go. There's Mr. Fly. Okay.
I'll get him in a minute.
I have probably made way too much chicken for the amount of tamales we're going to
So how
make.
much is that?
This is 2 whole chickens,
Okay.
2 large chickens. And now, as you can see, a lot of broth around here. Okay.
Yes.
One of the secrets, whether you're making chicken or whether you're making pork, or even beef, one of the secrets to a very good tamal is you want a very, 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 as flavorful a broth as you can get. If, with the chicken, what I did, I just boiled the chicken. You don't want to overboil it because it's going to cook in the chile some more and you don't want to just turn it to mush. So cook it until it's just cooked. Take the carcasses out of the water, let it cool down, take all the meat off. I did that last night. And then put your bones and cartilage and everything back in the pot and boil it slowly, simmer it. You could even put it on a really slow simmer overnight because you want as rich tasting a broth as you can get, almost like a bone broth if you want to go that far. Now, for pork tamales, traditionally the tamales used to be made out of a head of a pig. That's the way my grandma did it at first. Now, the head of the pig, of course, is full of bone, and you'd wind up with this rich, gelatinous broth. But now, modern people are kind of grossed out by that. My grandma stopped making it out of the head of a pig because the head of the pig the meat is great, it's flavorful, but it's very fatty. You wind up with chunks of fat in your, and it was still delicious, but she was concerned about her health. So what she started doing was just taking like a pork butt, and she eventually, and these made the tamales I make today because everybody adored them so much. She would make the tamales out of half pork, half beef. So when I cook my pork butt, and I will put in extra bone to help make up. First of all, I'll cook a picnic. Okay, let me back up. I don't use a pork butt. I get a pork picnic that has skin on it because a lot of flavor comes from the skin and the fat. And then I'll add some extra bone. I might add like a pig's foot. I might add something that really helps are pork ribs, short ribs. Throw some of those in there. And of course, with your chuck roast, you don't want to boil your. I use chuck roast for the beef part. Just boil that with whatever bone is there. But all that extra bone and that skin from the picnic makes a really flavorful broth. And if it becomes kind of gelatinous, even better. Okay. But that's one of the big secrets to a very flavorful tamal. So now we've got these, I've got my broth that I simmered slowly for several hours. and I've got my chicken, and we're going to shred the chicken meat up.
Okay.
To shred it up, and then we're going to get it cooked with some of the broth and the chiles and the spices.
Okay.
Okay, break these pods open.
Okay.
The only chile I put in my tamales is chile ancho. Anyway, so you want to take your chile ancho, and you want to break it open. Only get the skin or the flesh. Get rid of the seeds. If you see these long dry veins in them, you want to pull those out. The stem. Get rid of these seeds. The stem. Sometimes you will see. Let me see if I can find any here. I'm not really seeing them here. Ooh, a couple of seeds. But you can sometimes find these long, dry, lighter colored veins. You want to pull those out too if you can. It's not going to ruin the dish, but and some people, just as a side note, some people do for flavor, just like in mole, do put in a few of the seeds just for extra flavor. You can do that too. And because it all gets ground up. Let me see how many. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. We're taking our chiles, and how much chili you use for a batch depends on, of course, how big the batch is that you're making. But it varies how much chili you have to use. I've had times when 3 chiles were enough for 5 pounds of meat. And then there are times when I have to use 8 or 10. So it doesn't hurt to have to process extra chile, because what you can do is make your paste and freeze it. And so later, if you want to do something like make enchiladas or make some more tamales, a small batch, you'll have it there.
Okay.
But it's always better to have more. So we're going to simmer our chiles for just a little bit until they sort of plump up and become kind of like moist prunes.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll puree them, right?
Yes, and then this is pretty much what your chili should look at. It's simmered, maybe 20 minutes at a low simmer. You're just trying to rehydrate them. They don't need cooking, just rehydration. Don't put you're going to need the liquid to help the machine puree it, but you don't want to put so much in that you wind up diluting the flavor of the chiles. You can always, if you wind up a little short of liquid when you're pureeing, you can always put a little bit of plain water in there. It's okay. But we just need enough to get the machine to work and not burn the motor out. So we're going to bring it on over here.
Do you need a trivet, or are you okay?
Let me hand me the trivet under those gloves over there, but this is supposed to grind flour.
Oh, really?
It's supposed to. Now,
it has a dry blade. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's supposed to be able to. I have not tried it, but I might try a small amount just to see. So I am.
You can try like chickpeas and almonds and see if you can get an almond flour.
I bet you I could do an almond flour at least. So we're just putting our. You probably want to let it cool down just a little bit too, because you don't want it you don't want this hot liquid to accidentally spatter. But a really good blender like my Ninja, can handle the hot stuff. If you just have kind of more of an old-fashioned blender, you might want to let it cool down just a little bit more. Just safety first, that's all. That's all I'm saying. And like I was telling Cassandra, I'm on the safe side. I'm making more chiles than I think I need. It's a bit of a mystery as to why from year to year you need different quantities of chile and spice and all that. That's why it's very important, if you can, to make tamales with somebody who already makes them, so you can get an idea of what everything should taste like. But to be on the safe side, I'm making extra pastes. Probably don't need this much paste, but I can freeze it and use it later to make more tamales, or I can make enchiladas, or a whole bunch of different stuff with chile ancho paste. So it won't go to waste.
So when you cook the chicken or the pork or anything like that, do you use onions or any sort of vegetables, or do you just cook the meat in its own?
Different. I have seen recipes that include. Now, that's a very good question. I have seen recipes that for pork or chicken that included onion and garlic. Here's the thing. My grandmother never put that in, and my mother told me, and she demonstrated one year that if you we're going to take the broth of the pork or the chicken, whichever, and if you've put garlic in there, it reacts with the masa oddly. It kind of changes the texture of the masa, and my mother showed me one year what happened, and the masa, I'm sure it would have been okay and it would have been edible, but it was different. And my grandmother never put onions in it. She never put any kind of spice when they're just cooking the meat. So just when you cook the meat, it's just the meat. It was off camera, but it got so thick that it wouldn't move in the blender anymore. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a quick look at the paste to see if it's fine enough, if it's ground finely enough. That's actually really nice, but I'm going to put a hair more liquid and let it run through a little bit more, because there could be just a few little odd and end pieces in there that are, still not ground up. But you want it pureed. You just don't, you want it a smooth puree, like a thick tomato sauce. So I'm just, to be on the safe side, I'm just going to add just a little bit more water. I mixed it around with a spoon so it'll move a little. There you go. That's probably plenty. And let me just move it a little so it'll rotate, and then I'm sure we'll be fine. My grandmother had passed away, and I wanted to make her tamales. I had learned at her side since I was little, and I was doing it all by memory. And the meat wasn't quite right. The flavor wasn't quite right. I could not figure out what it was I was doing, and I knew there was something I'd forgotten. I knew it, but I couldn't remember it. My grandmother had one last sibling that was alive, her youngest sister, my Aunt Ambrosia. And I went to visit her, and I did not realize that Aunt Ambrosia is the one that taught my grandmother how to make tamales. And this part I was skipping was this part. You take your chili paste and you cook it for 30 minutes.
Okay.
That, I don't know what the food chemistry is, but that causes the spices, the chile, to soak into your meat. If you don't do this, what'll happen is you'll have a chili broth, but when you spoon your meat out and look at it, even though it's simmered for a while, it'll be white or it'll be uncolored. There won't be, but whereas if you cook it, that chile permeates the meat.
Okay.
So what we do.
And we're talking about just cooking the chili paste, not cooking the chili paste and meat yet. Right?
No, exactly. Just the chili paste.
Okay.
All right. So, my regular recipe for tamales, a regular pork or beef or both, I would use as my fat lard. Lard is what you use. But these are going to be kosher chicken tamales. And something I discovered last year, I have a friend who is vegan, and he did me a good turn, and
of the freezer section at a kosher grocery store, you can get rendered chicken fat, and it's like ghee or butter. It's really thick and nice.
Oh, I'm sure it's great. But of course, when you cook your chicken, you got all that nice chicken skin and fat, so it's just the frugal way of doing it, I guess.
Yes.
But yes, if you run short or you don't have time to render your own fat, by all means, I'm sure that schmaltz is just lovely. All right, so now this is another place where you have to be careful, safety careful. you need to cook the puree in fat. You just want enough fat so that the puree is not sticking to the bottom of the pan. But you don't want to put so much in that you have it splattering violently, boiling in that fat, because this is a watery mixture, the puree, and this is fat. You mix the two, you've got things spitting at you. So you want to be careful. So we're just going to, and I can add some more fat. I put, I guess, what is that? 2-3 tablespoons, something
Probably
like
about
that.
3 tablespoons.
Yeah. And I have quite a bit of paste here, so that should be fine. If it feels like it's sticking, throw a little bit more fat in. Just, use your common sense. But we are going to melt this, and once this is melted, we're going to put our puree in. And this is where the women from the girls are separated, because you want to gently cook it for 30 minutes over the heat. It's going to thicken, it's going to darken, you're not burning it. Once again, I don't know the food science behind it, but you've got to do that in order for that chile to wind up permeating your meat. And that's what you want.
Okay.
So safety first.
So when easy, fine. Don't worry about me.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, so when you pour your puree into your fat, it might be a good idea to pour it into the fat once it's melted, but not super hot, or not really hot yet, to just avoid this thing spitting out at you. Oh, and another thing about making tamales, always wear old clothes, because chili ancho, if you get it in your clothes, it tends to be very hard to get rid of. So, wear something expendable. Alrighty. So now this is just the chili paste. This is not any other spices in it. And in order to keep it from burning, we can see that the fat is bubbling. It's cooking. But in order to keep it from burning, this is where the craftsmanship comes in. You've got to stand here and just gently mix it so that so you can make sure it is not sticking at the bottom.
Okay.
Stop cooking the paste at about 25 minutes in, and I've done that before. You can see it looks like it looks like fudge.
Yeah.
It looks like fudge. You don't want it to start smelling burned, and if you keep the fire reasonably low and you keep moving it, you're not going to have a problem with that.
Yeah, it looks good.
But it looks good. It looks like fudge, which is or brownie mix. So we're good here. Now here's our shredded chicken. You don't have to shred it teeny tiny, because as you cook this, it's going to fall apart. So just get it into smaller pieces rather than the half a breast.
Yeah.
The half a breast you took off the chicken. So we're going to need some stock in this. And I just happen to have some left in my pot here. I'm sorry. Let's
move all this.
Thank you. Oh, whoops. Sorry.
You got it?
Yeah, I got it. So we're gonna need. You don't want to turn this into soup, because we're going to need to put this filling in our tamales, and you don't want a mixture that's dripping all over the place. But at the same time, we need enough broth in here so that when we cook the chicken with the spices and all, it's not going to be sticking to the bottom of the pot. We'll be able to do that. So I have some of my leftover stock still here in this pot. I'll retrieve some from the fridge if I need more. It looks like I'm going to use all of this. And yeah, I think I'm going to need a little more. So I'll just go grab some.
So it's not quite covering the top yet.
Yeah.
You want it to cover the top more or less?
Yeah, pretty much. And maybe just a teeny bit over. Some stock in with the chicken. I have extra stock on the side here if it gets too thick or you want to stick on the bottom a little. I can add a little more stock. Now this is one of the reasons you really, really want to cook your bones to make your stock for a long time. The easiest thing I have found is if you make your meat filling the night before, and you cook it with all the spices and you have your stock, what happens is that stock becomes it has gelatin in it. And so when you're putting your tamales together, it's a cohesive mass. Your filling's a cohesive mass, and it's not dripping all over the place. Much easier to make your tamales to fill. You can make your filling the same day, as there's nothing that says you can't. But I like chilling it overnight because it just makes it a ton easier to put it all together. Now, whether you're making chicken or fat is key in tamales, period. And so if I've rendered this chicken fat from the chicken skin, if you are making pork beef filling, you want some lard in there because the lard and fat are going to help the chile, I guess, kind of permeate. And it gives it flavor, of course. So I'm going to do a little, that should be plenty. Just a little chicken fat in there. And we'll save the rest. Maybe we'll throw that in with our masa. I rendered it earlier from the chicken. Okay, now, how many pods do you think we put in there? Like 16? I think?
Yeah, it was about 2 packets.
Alrighty. What I start with, like I said before, I make more paste than I need to because you never know how much you're going to need. Usually with, if I have 5 pounds of meat, I've put in as little as 3 pods and as many as like 10. And that's why you've got to just know what flavor you're chasing and just taste it as you go along. So I'm going to start with a couple of spoonfuls like that of my paste. This is about 3 pounds of chicken in here. This is what we weighed it at. And so I'm going to take a couple of these, start with it. You can always add more. And we're going to start to mix that in. I'm bringing the heat up so I can cook it in. There you go. Now you see how that, of course, the stock is getting all nice and colored. Had we not cooked that chili paste, no matter how long you cooked your chicken in your chili, when you lift it out, it's going to be white like that, rather than anything soaking into the chicken or the meat. So that's, once again, one of the reasons we do that. Something else we do is cumin. This is cumin is an important part of the northern style tamales. Now, Cassandra had asked me to make my grandmother's recipe with chicken, everything the same except chicken, so she could have it kosher. A little more traditionally, in Mexican cooking, chicken tamales, you don't usually put a lot of spice in the chicken filling. That's just a little more typical, but once again, there's so many recipes out there, it's however you like it. I start off, if I had about 5 pounds of pork, I might start out with an ounce of comino, but I'm going to add my ingredients slowly because I want to see how the chicken carries the seasoning. So I'm going to, and that looks like a lot, but your northern style tamales do have a distinct cumin flavor. And even if you don't think you like cumin, try it. Try this because it gives it an earthy flavor rather than, it changes. I just don't know how to describe it. It gives it a nice earthy flavor and it doesn't taste overly of cumin. But we're going to start with that. Now, the other thing we're going to use, here's the other thing my grandmother did. And she used Gebhardt's chili powder. And a lot of your traditional Mexican recipes, like I said before, we never put in garlic because it seemed to, or onions. The Gebhardt's chili powder will have just a little bit of onion powder, garlic powder. I think it has some paprika in it. It's also got some powdered ancho in it. My grandmother discovered that she needed this for more flavoring, to add a more complex, a more well-rounded, complex spice flavor. So, and as I'm a big stickler on doing everything by scratch and not using processed stuff, but all this are spices. You know, it's dry ground chile ancho and other spices. It's just a spice mix, so I feel okay doing that. I'm going to start with a tablespoon of this as well. And once again, we'll go from there. We'll need to taste it and see how it goes along. Once again, that's another reason why it's rather important to make this with someone whose recipe you like. If you have somebody, somebody who makes homemade tamales and you like their recipe, ask them to show you how they make it and taste it along the way. You have to see if the flavor's right. So I have that in there. Salt. Now here's an interesting thing about salt and tamales. You want to oversalt your tamales. You want to oversalt it a little. You don't want to make it disgusting, but you want to get it to the point where it tastes like somebody just tasting it might say, oh, you put a little too much salt in there. The reason we oversalt it is because when you steam, this is one of the reasons some people's tamales come out bland. When you steam the tamales, a lot of the salt is steamed out. So that's why we oversalt it just a little. Once again, I think I'll just put a tablespoon in here. And we'll go from there because we'll be tasting it. And I know the flavor I'm chasing. And we'll do that for the moment. Now, and we need to let this simmer, of course. I'm going to turn this up. Now, one of the, well, like I said, you don't want it real soupy. Some of that caldo, some of the broth is going to, of course, dissipate as we cook this chicken. We simmer it. But one of the things I told Cassandra is that towards the end, we're going to put some maseca in it. Now, what maseca is, it's a flour. Of course, you know that you use the masa to make your tamales. Maseca is the powdered form of the masa. If possible, if at all possible, you want to go to a local tortilla factory, and buy their fresh made masa. It's head and shoulders exponentially better than using the dried maseca. Of course, the problem is lots of people don't live anywhere near a tortilla factory. So what they're going to have to do is use maseca to make their masa dough. And a lot of cooks, use it, and they like the tamales that come out. I've never used it. I've always gone to the tortilla factory, and later you'll see the fresh masa that I picked up. But what we're going to do for the moment, because I have not bought my masa yet, we are making the filling a week before we roll the tamales out. And we're going to put this in the freezer till we're ready to make our tamales. And so I don't have my masa yet. So since I don't have my masa yet, I'm going to use the maseca, the masa flour, to thicken this in a bit. And for the purposes of thickening this, it'll be fine. It's the same stuff you put in chili con carne to thicken it, so it'll be great. So now we're going to let it start simmering a bit, and we'll taste it in a bit and just see where the seasoning goes.
Now we're adding the masa.
Alrighty, now Cassandra and I have been tasting this as it goes along, and we've been adding more of the chili paste, more of the comino, more salt, more of the Gebhardt's chili powder as we've gone along. Once again, it seems to change every year as to how much you put in. I'd say we had, about 5 tablespoons of the chili paste?
Yeah.
Probably at least 4 or 5 tablespoons of the comino, and another maybe 5 tablespoons of the Gebhardt's chili powder. I just told Cassandra that if you cannot find Gebhardt's brand, Mexine brand is not a bad substitute. That's Mexene. It's not bad. If Gebhardt's isn't available. Now I'm going to add the maseca powder. Typically, I would already have bought my masa, and it would be in the fridge. So I would be getting it ready to make roll my tamales the next day. But since I don't have the masa, I'm just mixing up some maseca to thicken this a bit. I'm going to take just a little more. That's maybe, I'm eyeballing it, maybe about 1/3 of a cup.
Yeah, I think so.
And I'm going to mix it with a little warm water. Warm water. Now, if I had my masa with me, I'd take probably about 1/3 a cup for this amount, about 1/3 a cup of the masa, and mix it with warm water in a little bowl, and then put it in here. But like I said, we're doing this next week, so I don't have my masa with me. But this will do the trick. I'm just trying to let this get warm. Come along. And I was telling Cassandra, if you want to do kosher tamales, you don't have to do chicken. You can also do all beef tamales. And once again, just don't put lard in it. Substitute in your masa, and we'll talk about the masa later, but you can do half coconut oil and half shortening. I saw a lot of recipes that called for shortening in your masa, and I tried it, and unfortunately your masa should have a wonderful unctuous feel to it, and the shortening did not give that. So I used a combination of shortening and coconut oil. And that did it. It gave the nice mouthfeel that lard usually gives to the masa. So that's what I'm going to run with if I'm needing to do something kosher or vegan. I discovered that the last year because I had a friend who's a vegan, and he'd done me a really good turn, so I wanted to reward him with some vegan tamales. And that's how I wound up making the masa. I made him bean tamales, and you want to make sure it's down to a slurry. You don't want it to be dough-like. There you go. You want it to be nice and loose, because if there's any lumps in there of masa, you could cook really quickly and become kind of a corn ball, a little lump in there. So it needs to be nice and loose like that, so that it won't. Come on, sorry. Alrighty, so I'm going to put this in and mix it as well as I can as I put it in. See, I'm seeing a couple little lumps in there, so let me mix those out. Yeah, this is starting to smell right. Don't you think? It's starting to smell right. Where is my little spatula? Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I think you cook with your nose as much as you do anything else.
Yeah, you do. For this, you do. But like I said, once you've sort of gotten to the point where you like, where you feel like you've got at least a baseline for the spicing, you can personalize this. You can add different chiles. You can experiment with chile guajillo or chile, put some pasilla in it if you want to use a mixture. Check the internet. There are a lot of family recipes out there. And if you want it, I was telling Cassandra again that my grandmother never made it spicy hot. We call it picoso, like where it burns, where there's a burn to it, because we had so many children in the family that were going to eat it. And I never liked that kind of spicy hot stuff when I was little. So you can add a chile arbol, you can add chile pequin, you can add other chiles that do have that burn in it if that's what you like, and make it your own. It's your tamal. There's no wrong way of doing it. It's, whatever your family prefers. Some people like their tamales nice and hot. Now you see how that chicken is breaking down? That's what we want. We want it to kind of break down. And you see how this has started to thicken up. And it's not, some of the broth is cooked away, which is good because we don't want it, we just want enough broth in it so it's not going to stick to the bottom of the pot and burn and all that. And like I said before, if you made a good broth, if you chill it, you might even have some gelatin in it, and that'll make the filling cohesive, and it'll be easier to stuff your tamales. So there we go. We're probably pretty much ready to take it off the stove in a bit and let it cool and get it packed up and frozen for next weekend. And let me just taste it real quick. And look at that. Look at that. You see how the chile has been permeating our meat? The meat is darkening. That's what you want. Of course, chicken is much whiter than pork. But if you had pork or beef in here, the chile would be permeating it, but it would also, your meat would be darker, just because the meat starts off darker. And like I said, chicken's a light meat, but yeah, look at that. See how it's not white when you pull it out of the chile anymore.
Looks awesome.
Then we're gonna let it simmer just a little bit with the masa in it, because just like when you make chile con carne, the masa will change the flavor a little bit. It'll sort of bring the spicing together.
Awesome.
And there you go.
Very cool. Thank you, Rachel.
Anytime.
You're on.
Alrighty. Okay, now, I usually go through anywhere between 15 and 20 pounds of masa every Christmas. But I wanted to show you on a small scale how to prepare your masa. Today we're going to be using a vegan recipe that I kind of came up with because I want to make some kosher beef ones today. But the proportions are still the same. Mixing your masa is a no-brainer. So it doesn't matter that our ingredients are just a little bit different. It's the only difference between making the ones I make every year is just the mass amount of masa. I usually have this full of masa, it's just the amounts and using different fats rather than lard. It'll be the same thing. So first we have our masa fresh from the tortilla factory. This is what you want, if at all possible. And if you're blessed enough to live in an area with a tortilla factory where people make their own tortillas, they will be selling this masa for tamales. You want to ask for masa for tamales because the masa for tortillas is different. The masa for tamales is a little bit coarser. You also want to ask, they'll also have the masa all prepared with the chile and the fat, the lard, whatever. You don't want that, okay? You want to make your own, so tell them, they call it masa preparada, the one that already has everything in it. You want the plain, you just want the plain masa. So, this is a perfect amount to show you what proportion of fat to masa I use. And the first thing we want to do, if it's better to have your masa, this has been in the fridge, but I took it out a couple of hours ago. If at all possible, you want your masa at as close to room temperature as you can get. If it's still somewhat chilled, that's fine. But you don't want it ice cold, because what will happen is when you put your fat in, the fat will immediately solidify and you'll have a problem. It won't be as easy to mix it. So what we want to do is we want to just break our masa up into little wads to make it easier to mix everything in. And this doesn't look like much in a bundle, but trust me, it expands for some reason once you've got everything in there. So we're just going to tear this up a little. Doesn't have to be teeny tiny bits. You don't have to be especially careful. And this is yellow masa. This is yellow corn. Now the tortillerias around here, the tortilla factories, only offer yellow corn. But I went to the Fiesta grocery store the other day, and they had a choice of, oh, well, Cassandra got some masa, and they had a choice. Yeah, it's fine. Still fresh. Sorry. I'm always paranoid. Okay, great. Yes, still nice and clean. The white masa is sweeter. White corn is sweeter. My personal preference for any kind of tortillas, there we go. For any kind of tortillas or any Mexican cooking is the yellow. The white, there's nothing wrong with it, but it is sweeter. Although, when I was in Santa Fe, there was this man in the square that sold chicken tamales. They were magnificent. I mean, to die for. And they used white corn, the sweeter white corn masa, and it was a green chile, hatch chili, and chicken filling. There was no red chili ancho in it. It was magnificent. I want to replicate that at some point. So at some point I'll probably be going to Fiesta, good, to get masa. Alright, so we're just tearing this up. And the proportion of masa to fat, whatever you're using, lard or whatever. Traditional recipes, and most of the recipes you'll see out there, tell you to put in 2 parts lard for 1 part fat.
I mean, 2 parts masa, 1 part
I'm
fat.
sorry, yeah, you're right. 2 parts masa to 1 part fat. So if you have 10 pounds of masa, you're going to put in 5 pounds of lard. Now, to me, that's too much fat, and it makes it greasy, I think. But masas are different. One year I did have to, just because of the kind of masa that was available to me, it did really need the 2 parts masa, 1 part lard. So it's not a bad thing at all to steam up a half dozen tamales, mix everything up, make about half a dozen tamales, steam those quickly, see how it comes out and see how you feel about it. If you think it's too dry, not enough fat, go ahead and just add more fat to your masa. Or if for some reason you feel like you've tipped your hand and you've gotten too much fat in the masa, it's fixable. Just get some more masa and throw some more masa in to lessen the proportion of fat. So we're all done here. You might want to... Okay. All right. So once again, like I said, this batch I'm making right now with Cassandra is vegan. I'm trying to make kosher. I'm trying to make kosher tamales for her. And so instead of lard, I'm using coconut oil and shortening. I came up with that in case for some reason you don't want to use lard. Maybe there's a dietary restriction, whatever. But what I found is if you want to make a nice vegan masa, there are a lot of recipes out there on the internet that say just substitute shortening. I tried that, and the shortening did not have that beautiful, silky, unctuous feel that lard does. I was missing that. So what I decided to do is when I substitute fat, a different kind of fat for the lard, I use half shortening and half coconut oil. The coconut oil gives it that beautiful, silky, smooth feeling that the shortening lacks. Now, what I just tore up in the bowl over there is exactly 3 pounds of masa. So following the formula that I use of 3 parts masa, 1 part fat, we just need an even pound of fat in here. So I've got to put in 8 ounces of shortening, because half of it's going to be shortening, half of it's going to be, and a kitchen scale is really helpful when you're making tamales. It's not totally necessary, but it does help a lot, because it makes it easier not to have to guess. Let me see, so we're at almost, there we go, exactly 8 ounces. Super So I'm going to put the lid back on that. I'm going to get another spoon so I don't kind of contaminate. Oh, and by the way, I would really recommend you keep a lot of paper towels. I try to use a minimal amount of paper towels during my regular life, but when you're making the masa, there is so much fat and grease everywhere. You probably want paper towels. I would also maybe get a bottle of Dawn to help cut the grease when you're washing your dishes and things like that. So I'm getting another spoon for the coconut oil, and I'm resetting my scale here back to 0. So we'll try to get exactly 8 ounces of this. Oh, come on. I might have to open my other jar. Oops, there we go. Or I might make it here. Just make it.
Do you want me to catch that?
Nah, it's all right. Just leave it. Okay, it rang once, so it's spam. Let's see. We're getting there. We're getting there. We might make it. Exactly 8. There we go. That's a good sign. God is with us. All right. All right. So now we have our fat, and we are going to warm it up. We're going to melt the fat. And now be careful, because you don't want to get it super hot. I'm warming up my broth there. It's starting to steam. Let me see. I'm going to put my finger. Oh, yeah, that's gotten really hot. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to put the fat here. You want it just melted, because we're going to put this in the masa, and then we have to put our hands in it. First of all, you don't want it super hot because it's going to cook your masa, and secondly, you don't want to burn yourself when you put your hands in. So it shouldn't take but a couple of minutes here just to melt it. And I stick my finger in. Oh, and my hands are very, very clean. As a matter of fact, I wash my hands so much when I'm making tamales that I'm grateful for when I have to put my hands in the lard, because my hands start getting dry. There we go.
All right, I'm going to pause. Okay, ready? Here we go. You're on.
All right, so we've got our melted fat, and we're going to pour it into our masa, and this is where we get to get hands on, and now we have to mix the masa up. Now, this masa that I got from the Dallas Tortilla Factory is very smooth, but the ones I used to get from Luna's tragically had a fire, and they've never been the same. And it's going to look like a lot. It's going to look like a lot of fat, and you'll never get it in there. You will. And once again, this is only 1 pound of fat to 3 pounds of masa. But very frequently, when you get good masa, you're going to feel little hard lumps in the dough of masa in the dough, and you've got to smash those with your fingers as you go around. It doesn't mean that the masa is substandard or it's bad. It's just the way that one came out. Good. I'm sorry. I was explaining to Cassandra why I keep sniffing the dough. I bought this dough from the the tortilla factory day before yesterday. When my grandmother made her tamales, she would send my grandfather to the tortilla factory to bring back the masa and immediately start working with the warm masa to make tamales. In my harried life, I have to usually take the masa and put it in the fridge for a day or two before I can get to making the tamales, and that's perfectly okay. You can do that. So if time does not permit you to start, go to the tortilla factory that morning and then start your tamales. I've had masa in the fridge for I think 4 days, and it was still good. But you want to go ahead. All you have to do is smell it because you can tell when it's gone sour. That's what happens if the masa is gone off. It'll have a very distinct sour smell. Right now, this smells clean and it smells of pork. Now, like I said, this is, once again, from the Dallas Tortilla Factory. It's a very smooth masa. I don't feel any of the little lumps under my fingers that I have to crush. So that's a time saver. But like I said, if that winds up in the masa you've bought, no problem, no worries. It doesn't mean it's not quality masa. Has something, I guess, to do with the grinding process. But see, this is coming together really nicely. Now, let me tell you something at this point. Almost exclusively every tamale recipe I have seen on the internet, in cookbooks, and even in Diana Kennedy's famous Mexican cookbooks, call for taking the lard or the fat and beating it into the masa. You don't melt it, you beat it into the masa. And they even say, take your heavy duty mixer and mix it that way. Well, first of all, if you are using a mixer, I use big quantities of masa. Like I said, 15, maybe even 20 pounds when I make tamales for Christmas. The mixer's not adequate. But secondly, if you're mixing it by hand, which a lot of, once again, the cookbooks say, yeah, just take a spoon and just beat it in. That is backbreaking work, absolutely backbreaking. So I thought, this is the way my grandmother did it. You melt the lard and you mix it in. And so for years now, decades, every time I meet a little old gray-haired Mexican lady who makes tamales around here, I ask her, and I say, do you beat in your lard or do you melt it? And she looks at me like I'm utterly nuts. Who would beat their lard in? Why would you do that? So I don't know if it's a regional thing. It may be a regional thing, but this is the way Grandma did it. This is the way all the women here in the North Texas area do it. So this is the way I'm going to continue doing it because it's always been successful. And there we go. And no need to, there's another place where they test in the cookbooks. Where they test the masa, they take a little ball, if it floats in water, it's right. We never did that. We just put the proportions of masa and fat in.
Yeah, there comes a point in time that you've tested, that you've made so many, you know what is right, feels like. Right,
and in my experience, like I said, now I think that my grandma did use half lard, no. Yeah, I think she did use like half lard and half masa, and they were beautiful, they were wonderful, they were delicious. If you use, not half lard, half masa, I'm sorry, 2 parts masa to 1 part fat, I believe that's what she used, and they were always delicious, they were always great, but just as I've come along, I found that they're just as wonderful and delicious with less fat. So, but if you want to, once again, it's a preference. Plus, like I said, sometimes the masa rarely, but sometimes the masa just seems to need the extra fat, so don't sweat it. Either way will be correct. Experiment and make these your own. Yeah. Okay, I'm asking her to film this. I have to go grab the broth, and of course my hands are all covered with masa. Oh, there you go. That's another thing that happens. Masa everywhere. But I really recommend that before you wash your hands, wipe it off with a paper towel, because it really helps get all that grease off. I'm telling you, there'll be grease all over the house, and it just have a lot of paper towels and have some Dawn on hand. I don't have Dawn, but I'm using. I'm even having to wash my hands in a little dish liquid just to make sure I get it all off. But it's worth it. It's worth it.
Yes, it is.
See, broth, a warmed broth.
And as mentioned before, these are going to be beef tamales with no lard. So we're putting beef broth into the masa.
Yeah. And here is the chile.
And this is the same chili we made last time, right?
Yeah. Well, no, this one's different. The chile we made last time, we made with lard, didn't we?
No, we made coconut oil chili
Okay.
because we were making chicken, kosher
That's
chicken
right, for
tamales.
the chicken.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right. That was the chicken.
So it's the same recipe.
Yeah, same recipe. Alrighty. So, our lard is mixed, and now it is time to put in your broth, your chile, and your salt. The chile we're putting in, we're not trying to season the masa. We're just trying to put a little color into it, so it'll look nice. That's probably plenty. I put like, this is 3 pounds. I put like kind of a heaping teaspoon and a little more. That'll be plenty. How colored you want it, how light you want it, a matter of taste. Just my grandmother. My grandmother just said use it so that it doesn't. Porque no quiero que queda blanca.
Yeah.
So just it won't be pale.
Got it.
Okay, so there is the chile. You use a lot of salt when you use the masa, when you in your masa, and I've never measured, but the reason you want to oversalt your masa, just like you want to oversalt your meat just a little bit, is because when you steam them, it tends to steam salt out of it. So you want just a little. Now that's going to look like a lot, but But I'm starting with a relatively small amount.
And we're gonna taste as we go.
Yeah, we're going to taste as we go, and you'll know when you have the right amount of salt if you taste the masa, and it tastes like a Frito.
Okay.
That level of saltiness. You go that tastes almost like a Frito, you got it.
So can I take my leftover masa, bake it, and have Fritos?
Maybe you could try.
We haven't tried it yet,
Why
have
not?
we?
Or fry them.
Fry 'em.
Fritos are fried. Remember, squirt them out with a
Yeah.
icing bag or something, and make
Yeah,
them
that might
fried
work.
Okay, now this is our nice caldo. This is the beef broth because I'm making kosher ones for Cassandra. If I was making traditional pork tamales, it would be a pork broth. If I was making
Chicken, we use chicken broth.
chicken, you can use, if you're making chicken, use chicken broth, whatever.
And we're going to be making some vegetarian, vegan tamales, so that's
And-
going to have a vegetable broth.
That's
for the
going to
time.
have a vegetable broth, just a commercial one that
Yeah.
I bought because I don't typically have that in the house. Okay, now you want to be a little careful with your caldo. Just go around. You don't need a ton of it. That's probably, let's start with that. Once again, just like your fat, let it be warm but not hot. You don't want to cook your masa, and then we have to put our hands in it. So we're going to wind up burning ourselves if it's too hot. But the caldo gives the masa flavor, and it mixes the salt and the fat in. I'm sorry, the salt and the chile in. And the nice thing about this is that the chile, see, this is going to come out relatively dark. Let me mix it all in to see. I think this is going to come out darker than I had planned on, but that's still perfectly okay. It doesn't ruin the masa in any way, shape, or form. The masa is just going to have more color. That's all.
Yeah. So we were talking before I turned on the camera this time, and the consistency was almost like an egg salad, like a non-runny egg salad before we added the broth. And I think when you're done, it's going to be almost a fritter batter, almost like you feel like it would almost make like what do you call them, corn cakes or something if you were to fry it.
Open that for me. Would you?
This one here, you need more masa.
Yeah. Okay. This is a good lesson learned. I actually tipped my hand a little, and it's darker than I generally like, and it's a little softer, a little too soft, I think, with the caldo. I've never mixed up this small of an amount, so my judgment was off a little. So it's just a little bit too soft. So fortunately, I just happen to have on the side here some masa that I have already prepared only with the lard. Not the lard, only with the fat. There's no salt, there's no chile, there's no caldo. It's just the masa and the fat, and so it's here on the side, so I can just throw some more in there and help and this was vegan masa. This is with the coconut oil and the shortening. It's just another batch I prepared earlier, and I have it on the side. So I'm just going to throw some of this in. And so, like I said, it's a very repairable. It's usually a very repairable recipe, and let's see. Just using and everything is eyeballed. I mean, really, it's so simple. It's not hard to do. I'm just eyeballing how much more masa I want to put in. Once again, remember this already has fat in it, so it's ready to go in without it because this has the chile in the broth. So I'm just going to mix that in. I'm going to put a tad more in. There we go. So don't panic. You know, there's a lot of things you can do if something goes wrong. Don't panic. I do recommend that you, when you're starting out, you know, try a small batch. You know, start out, be aware that unfortunately the tortilla factories only sell their masa in 5-pound increments. And that's a pretty good amount of masa. This is a good amount of masa, and it's only 3 pounds plus whatever I put in. You know, start with a small batch and, you know, to just start practicing. And see, this masa that I just put in, it was cold. It came out of the fridge, so I'm having to kind of mush it in to the combination here. But it's very repairable, and that's why I suggest if you're starting out, steam a half dozen and see what does it need. You know, does it need more fat? Does it need more spice, more salt? If you put too much salt in the masa, let's say, once again, if you have, actually that's not a bad idea. Go ahead and buy your 5-pound masa because that's probably the only way you can buy it. And maybe go for making 3 pounds of it. Prepare 3 pounds of it to use for your tamales. And if something goes wrong, you can always add more masa back in. Just take some of the, you know, mix the extra masa you have with fat and throw it in. If you've put in too much chile, too much broth, too much salt. Actually, I had to do that the other day. It wound up, I did actually wind up putting in too much salt, which was a new one for me because it's kind of hard to do. But hey, it's the middle of COVID and we're all stressed. So there we go. I think I'd like just a little more of the masa in.
Okay. All right, so we've set up for tamales.
Yes, there you go.
And I've scanned the table, Rachel, so if you want to talk about
great.
what's on it.
So what you're going to need, of course, to assemble your tamales, you're going to need the masa, you're going to need the meat, you're going to need the corn husks, and you're going to need something to put, once you finish your tamal, you just start putting them someplace. I like these jelly pans. You use whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I've done is traditionally, and what should really happen, is we should have a tamalada at Christmas. It's a tamale making party where friends, family members, whoever, a group of people get together and you've got lots of masa and lots of meat and you all make the tamales together. And that's Christmas in Mexico. Unfortunately, in our modern day, even though I'm the oldest of 7 kids, nobody has an interest in learning how to make these. That's why I'm so passionate about them. First of all, it makes me feel close to my grandmother, like she's alive again when I make tamales. But also, it's a dying art. More and more people are not doing it because it can take some investment and time. If you make a small amount, like this 3 pounds of masa that we started out with, it's not that big of a project. But once again, it's traditionally you make lots and you give it to families and friends. And I think my record is 65 dozen by myself. So usually most years I'm just doing it by myself. But my goddaughter and Cassandra are interested, so I want to pass the skill on. Now, we need to look at hojas real quick. These are the corn husks, the hojas. All right, we need to learn a little bit about them. When I was a kid, you only bought hojas from the Mexican grocery store, and it was such a pain. The hojas are generally, at least the way it came back then, they are not a consistent size, and you had to keep picking through them. The corn silk was in them, so you had to keep picking corn silk out of it, and you had to keep digging through your pile of hojas to find ones that are appropriate for the size of tamal you want to make. And it was just, it's a big time waster. It really was. So now today, in most of your Mexican grocery stores, they have a better quality of tamal, hojas. They'll have hojas that are more consistent in size. They will have hojas that are pretty clean of the corn silk. So you can get these, and there's different brands. They're more consistent. But what I usually do is when you go to the tortilla factory, they sell packs of hojas that are generally perfect. And they cost more. But to me, especially because I'm making all these by myself usually, they're such a big time saver. They're worth the investment. And I usually buy the packs that are available at the tortilla factory. Now this year, I've used up the ones I bought. They had a limited number. And so I bought some packs from the grocery store. And they've been doing fine. But I'm still having to do some picking through. For instance, you see the one, okay, like there's this one in there that's that size. That's too small. Okay, this is, here we go. For the size of the tamal I want to make, I'll talk about that in a second. This is not going to work. It's too small. So I'm setting it aside because I'll show you what we use it for later. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We've already filmed steaming the tamales. When you steam your tamales, you have to put a canopy of hojas over the top to protect your tamales from the condensation dripping down from the lid of the pot. And that condensation is going to get in your tamales, going to make them wet and soggy, and they may not ever steam properly. So when you find an hoja that's not going to work, set it aside because that can become your canopy. That's too small. This is great. It's actually a little bit big. This is kind of tearing off there, so I'm just going to rip that off because this is great. This is a great size to make the size tamal I make, and I'll show you in a second. But you're going to find some that are ridged like that. Okay, don't use those because first of all, they're very stiff, and when you make your tamal, you're going to have to tie it to keep it closed because these are generally very stiff and they want to come undone. But also, you don't have the tamal is going to stick. It'll get cooked, it'll be delicious, but when you open it up, it'll be sticking. And my grandma, because she was trying to be frugal, would sometimes make the tamales like this, and I'd have to take a fork and scrape the tamale off, and it was still delicious, but yeah, you don't want that. So anything like that, set aside. It can be part of the canopy in the steamer. Alrighty, now let's talk about proportions when you put your tamal together.
Okay,
now let's talk about proportions when you make your tamal.
Okay.
Once again, a matter of taste or whatever your tradition is. There are tamales in Mexico that they make out of a whole pork loin that are 3 feet long. There are I've heard of tiny little tamales that they make with shrimp in them. This is the size I like. You can make them larger as you want to experiment more. You can make them bigger, but the important thing is you've got to keep the right ratio of meat to masa. And this is one of the great things about making your own tamales is you can be generous with the meat. And that's one of the problems with bought tamales. Even when you get them from a good tortilla factory, the masa is dirt cheap for them to produce because they grind it all themselves. And you wind up with tamales that are a big lump of masa with just a tiny bit of meat in the middle. So be generous with your meat. That's the beauty of your homemade tamales. Now, look at the hoja. There is a rough side and a smooth side. You see how ridged that is? I don't know if you can see it. Mm-hmm. This one is the smoother side. Even this side is a little bit on the rough side. And unless you have, but on the edge, you can feel how it's smooth. You want to put your ingredients on the inside of the hoja. And the rough side is the outside. One way to tell, of course, is just feeling it, because you'll be able to see that it's smoother on the inside, but also the way it curls. See how that just wants to curl naturally inward? If I turn it around, it's not, it's not wanting to make that nice curl. So that's how you tell the inside of your tamal. I thank the heavens for this. It's only been the last few years I've started to use it, and it never occurred to me to use cookie scoops. I've been having to judge the amount of masa I'm putting in. This is perfect for the size tamal I want to make. And what I do, you scoop it out, and you level it off on the side of your bowl. Scoop it in. This is how you spread it out. Now you can do, if you're left-handed, you can do it just on the opposite side, but you want to bring your masa on, spread it on one side of the tamal, of the hoja. Now, you don't have to obsess over perfection, because what happens is when you roll your tamale up, it all mushes together anyway, and it kind of makes up for any inconsistencies in your spreading. This is the way I like it. And I'm going to put, see how there's just enough masa to put a little divot in it when I press down with my finger. That's the way I like it. You can make bigger tamales. I had absolutely delicious tamales that tasted just like my grandmother. A lady used to have a restaurant, and it was your uncle that brought them, your Uncle Pat. And she made tamales about that size, but they were delicious. They were wonderful, but she had the right proportion of meat to masa. So that, it change the sizes if you want, but make sure you're good with the meat. Now, you can lift, it depends on how you want to do this. You can pick up your masa with a fork and put it in your dough. I prefer, it's faster for me to use my clean hands and just pick up the masa. And I find that the scoop, now this scoop is a 1.5 tablespoon scoop. It's generally, I'm so happy I found the one that actually shows the measurement of the scoop, because I never knew how much masa I was actually putting in when I use my unmarked cookie scoops. But this is generally like a medium-sized cookie scoop. Usually you'll have little bitty cookie scoops, this medium size, and then a bigger cookie scoop. This is the size I use. And if you can find it marked or someplace where they specify, it's a 1.5 tablespoon scoop. That'll be great. So here, this is, like I said, the joy of tamales is you can finally get enough meat in it. And what you're aiming for generally is about 2 parts masa, 1 part meat. And here, I'm going to get a knife, excuse me, I'm going to get my scissors, here we go. Sometimes when you fold up your tamal, it'll have a little tail, and I just clip that off because it's just kind of a pain. And I take it and I lay it this side down on my little pan, and that's how I stack them up. All right, now let me show you, let me also show you how I fold it. So I'm pulling out an hoja. Let's see, that one's a little rough, but I'll be able to manage on that. Let me find another one. There we go. Sometimes these tamale hojas are so big that you can actually tear them in half. So let me see if that works. Yeah, see, this one is so big that I can literally tear it in half, and it makes two. But when you tear your tamal, always tear it from the bottom, because you'll have control over the tear. Tear it, and there you go. Alrighty, let me show you once again how you embarrar, but also let me show you how you fold. So you want to start on the left side here. Once again, on the right side. If you're left-handed, like my husband, he has to do it on the left. That's fine. Take your tamale masa, just scoop it off. There you go. You have a nice little ball. Just do a spread, 2-3 spreads on it. Try to get it to where you've got it fairly evenly. And this is such a time saver, these scoops, they really are. And you just want, just make sure you don't have any area that's not too thin, and it'd still be delicious even if you do that. And put your meat in, there you go. That's about how much I use. I'm still having to eyeball the meat. I haven't found anything to measure it with. But there you go. There you go. Be generous with your meat. And the way you fold it, remember, we did this on the right side of you fold that, we put this on the right side of the tamal, and we have space here. So you just fold it over like that, fold it over like that, and tuck that in, and there you go. It's done.
Okay. What are you doing here? You just...
All right, this is a makeshift tamalera. I have a real one that you can see in just a minute, but this is just a large pot. This is a rack from an old tamalera that I put in the center. I covered it with foil, and I put pieces of foil around to make kind of a false floor that we can set more tamales on. And I have put enough water to come just under this rack. You don't want so much water in it that when it starts boiling, that it starts touching the bottom of your tamales, because that'll make them soggy. But I will show you in 1 second how we stack them. Okay? You're doing it. Okay. So I showed you my makeshift tamalera. We'll see a real one in a second. But in the middle, I don't know if you can see that, I just have an ordinary little white ramekin. You could use a little cup. And just like a haystack, I'm leaning them against that in the middle and stacking them around. And that's what you want to do. That's how you want to put them around. Now, you want to be careful not to pack them too tight, because what will happen is we're going to steam them. And if they're too tightly packed, if they're in there like sardines, it'll take forever for them to steam, because the steam can't come up through the layers of tamales.
So leave gaps.
Yes, leave some gaps. You could do it a little tighter than this, but since I have never worked with this masa before, I want to make sure it has plenty of room to breathe to see how it's going to steam. So it's because sometimes some masa wants to steam faster than others. So here we go. And you just take it around. And I forgot to count those, but oh well.
Got it. Turning the pot.
Okay, so with Cassandra's help, we've got all of these tamales. I can fit usually 4.5 to 5 dozen in this tamalera. You make sure you don't smush them together tight. You need some room because the cornmeal is going to expand, and if it's too tightly packed, your tamales are never going to steam. But a couple of things that I left out. Let's talk about hojas first. The hojas that I showed you, can't believe I forgot to mention it, but that's my life and hojas. You have to soak them overnight in the sink overnight, the day before you're making your tamales. I am famous for getting everything together and forgetting to soak my hojas, and then I have to delay my tamale making. So yes, just put them in hot water, put something heavy on top to make sure they stay submerged, and leave them there overnight. Now, in case you do forget, I have heard from my mother, I have never done it, but I've heard that you can boil them. Put them in a great big pot and bring them to a boil and let them soak in that for a while. And that is a quick way of rehydrating them and making them pliable. Because they've got to, instead of being dry, they need to be pliable. So, of course, you can make your tamales. The other thing I forgot to mention was the meat. If at all possible, make your meat the day before you're going to assemble your tamales, because the meat is much easier to handle if it's chilled. If it's all chilled and nice and solid, if you've made a good broth, the broth will have some gelatin in it, and that will congeal. That's the word I'm looking for. The meat will congeal, and it'll be very easy to lift and work with. Now, if the meat is just room temperature, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world, but just make sure you drain your meat when you pull it out. Make sure you shake off excess liquid and put it in there. But if it's chilled, then all that nice flavorful broth stays in your tamale meat, and you can put it in there. And the other thing I forgot to mention were the pennies in the bottom of the tamalera. If you can see the way the tamalera is set up, it's got a bottom that you insert. It has holes where the steam will come up. You want to throw 2 pennies into the water underneath, that's underneath this bottom plate, because as your water is boiling, you'll hear the pennies rattling. When the pennies stop rattling, that means your water is low and you need to put more water in. I've told you that the recipe is not a delicate recipe. You don't have to be absolutely precise. But one thing and there's lots of things you can do to save it. Like I showed before, my masa had a little too much. It was a little darker than I wanted. It was a little too loose. And I just added more masa in. But the one thing you can't save your tamales from is burning, running out of water and burning. Now, one year I had a problem, and if you've let the water go and you start to smell a burning smell, immediately take your tamales, because this is what I saved them 1 year. Immediately get your tamales off the heat, get your tongs, get your tamales out, get them out of that pot, even if they're still partially cooked. Get them out and just lay them on the jelly roll pan, whatever. Get the tamalera, wash it out thoroughly, get anything burned on the bottom, wash it out, clean it, and then start over again. Restack your tamales and start steaming them again. And it worked. It worked. As long as you get the tamales out of there, as soon as it started burning, the smoke, the burnt smell doesn't cling to the tamales if you get them out quick enough.
Okay.
Action.
All right, Winnie. So we have our tamales stacked in here. And like I said, you could pack them a little tighter, put some more in than I have here. But since this is the first time I've used this masa, I'm going to be conservative and get this. And I'm going to be conservative and there we go. And make sure it has plenty of room to steam. So we put hojas on top of this, and it forms kind of a tent over the tamales, because what's going to happen is they steam, condensed water will drip off the top of the lid onto the tamales, and if you don't have something covering them,
They'll get to it.
they will, you'll get the water dripping into your
I've never
tamales.
seen that done, but that makes a lot of sense.
Now you could also use, if you don't have, if you don't have extra hojas, you can use just a piece of aluminum foil. That'll do it too. You just want the water dripping down, not to drip into the tops of your tamales and ruin them and make them soggy. Do you still have filling left over, Cassandra? I do. You know what you could do? Go online and you want a good steam coming out, but you don't want it boiling so violently that the water winds up splashing way up onto the bottoms of your tamales, because then they'll get soggy and wet. Most important step in the whole whole process is you have to tie a little piece over the handle to protect your tamales from the evil eye.
El ojo.
Protect it from el ojo.
Uh-huh.
For jealous people who
Want
don't
them.
have tamales or don't know how to make them and will put the evil eye on your tamales. So,
Yeah, that's bad. That's just bad.
Bravo, Rachel. Thank you. So you put